Yeah, I should have. All right. I think we're ready to get started. Will the clerk call the roll?
Councilmember and Chair Berman.
Here.
Councilmember Burt. Here. Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Vice Mayor Niss. 3 present.
Thank you. And my understanding is Vice Mayor Niss will be joining us shortly. My apologies to everybody for being late. That shouldn't have happened, and I'm sorry about that. So we're going to get started on first item on the agenda is oral communications. Are there any? Off quorum, on quorum. No problem. I'm being rightfully kept in my place by the clerk's office on protocol.
Sorry.
Do we have any oral communications cards? Great. So then we'll move on to the first item on the agenda, which is the first quarter fiscal year 2015 financial results.
Great. Thank you, Chair Berman and members of the Finance Committee. My name is David Ramberg. I'm the Assistant Director of the Administrative Services Department. We are here to present the first quarter financial report for fiscal year 2015. What you'll see tonight are numbers that represent financial actuals through September 30th of 2014, which is the first quarter. At a high level, the positive story that I mentioned last Finance Committee meeting when we closed the fiscal year 2014 has carried forward into the first quarter of fiscal year 2015 in that revenue and expense indicators are still positive. Revenues are up slightly in fiscal year 2015 and expense are within budget. More specifically, first quarter general fund revenues are 4% higher than prior year. Total general fund revenue is 16% of the adjusted budget at this point in time, and that compares similarly to the 17% last year. You might perceive a lag there in revenues. As a reminder, we get the bulk of our property tax revenues in subsequent quarters as we progress through the fiscal year. So you will see that total general fund revenue percentage increase as we move through the fiscal year. The next quarterly report will be at the mid-year time frame. And then on general fund department expenses, we are slightly higher than prior year, but still well within the adjusted budget at 22%. I wanted to remind the Finance Committee of an item that was brought up at the last Finance Committee hearing. So if you were to refer to packet page 11, you will notice that we've included in there a item that you had requested for discussion of the interpretive center at the Baylands. So if you desire to pick that up tonight, it's included there in the report. The discussion last Finance Committee was to discuss about next steps on that. So that's available for you there. Now with that, I'd like to turn over the rest of the presentation to Laura Couric, our accounting manager, to discuss the details. Thank you.
Good evening, Finance Committee members. Laura Couric, I'm the accounting manager. And to continue what David indicated, we do have continuation of good news story into the first quarter of fiscal year 15. In particular, I'll start looking at the revenue in a little more detail. So if you can look at slide 3, and if you would please turn to packet page 4. There's a table, and I'd like to review some of the individual revenue categories in that table. First line item is sales tax. And if you would please note that the year-over-year change of 33% should have brackets around it because it's a negative, it's a decline. As noted in our report, the sales tax decline is due to a single vendor whose receipts temporarily spiked last year. Without that temporary spike, sales tax receipts for the first quarter are flat compared to the same quarter last year. And looking ahead into the second quarter, October and November receipts are slightly higher than the same months last year. Staff expects that sales tax revenue for the year will exceed the adopted budget amount of $26 million. A couple lines down, the transient occupancy tax receipts are up 15% over the first quarter last year. Daily rates have increased, and the Epiphany Hotel came online in March of 2014, both events of which are contributing to the year-over-year increase. And looking ahead into the second quarter, October receipts are continuing to trend higher than prior year. A couple more lines down, the documentary transfer tax is down 19% from the prior year. Prior year receipts were exceptionally high. We looked at October and November receipts. Those are continuing to trend downward from the prior year, and the full year budget may be adjusted downward. Charges for services revenue reflects a timing difference in invoicing to Stanford for fire services. If we nullify that timing difference, as well as the temporary sales tax spike that I mentioned earlier, then overall, the general fund revenue for the first quarter would be $660,000 or 3% higher than prior year first quarter. Overall, general fund revenues are at 16% of budget, which is in the normal zone for the first quarter. Moving to slide 4 and the table on packet page 6, we'll look at expenses. First quarter general fund department expenses of $35.4 million are at 22% of the full year budget, which is in the normal zone for the first quarter. And an item of particular note on the expenses is that the Development Services Department is reported separately starting with fiscal year 15. So this is going to result in lower expenses for other departments, most notably planning. And the last point that I'll make on expenses, as shown on slide 5 and the table on packet page 7, police overtime for the first quarter has reduced by 14% from the same quarter last year, and fire overtime has increased 9% from the same quarter last year. There's highly detailed variance explanations are provided in the report. Looking ahead to the second quarter, police overtime in October and November increased slightly over the same months prior year, and fire decreased from the prior year. So cumulative, for the 5 months ended November 30th, police will have used 53% of their budget, and fire has used 78%. Moving on to slide 6 and the table on packet page 9, we talk about the BSR activity, Budget Stabilization Reserve. So far in fiscal year 15, the activity consists of a $1.7 million contribution, which is to be used for one-time expenditures in fiscal year 15, as was approved in the prior year budget. And then we have year-to-date BAOs totaling $0.4 million, and these items are listed in the table. Moving on to slide 7, we have the enterprise funds and also the table on packet page 10. You can see that all enterprise funds had positive net income for the first quarter, with the exception of electric fund, which had reduced net income due to a combination of lower commercial revenue and higher utility purchase costs. Also of note, I would mention that the airport fund has started invoicing their customers for tie-down fees and other revenue. These services were not invoiced until October, so that revenue will be included in the airport fund's second quarter results. With that, I'll turn it over to Lalo for any further comments. Thank you.
I just wanted to, Lalo Perez, Chief Financial Officer, I just wanted to remind you that from a staff perspective, the first quarter is difficult to make projections from because there's not enough information, particularly for property taxes, for example. But there's some positive trends in this regard, that even though we had the one-time sales spike, we're not going down. We're flat. We'd rather be higher, but flat's it's better than down. And then obviously the hotel tax continues to be strong. We're internally working on segregating the funds that we committed to the infrastructure funding plan so we can identify them from not only the new hotels, but the new tax increase that is coming on board next year. So we'll have those funds segregated so we can account for them as we go forward. And with that, we can answer any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you guys very much for the presentation. I'll kick it open to colleagues if they have any questions or comments or concerns. Councilmember Holman?
Yes, thank you. On packet page 4, the chart on the table on that page, when I was reading this, it says sales tax, and understanding there was a spike last year that was unusual. I take it that that was a one-time spike. We don't expect that trend to return?
Correct. We had a particular business that had some temporary activity reflected over a period of quarters. And so this is the comparison into that quarter reflects that. But other than that, we're flat as adjusting for that.
Okay. So on that same line under sales tax, or across on sales tax, it says percent change. It has 33%, but it shows it as a positive 33%, but it's a negative 33%.
Yes, I apologize if we went too fast. Laura did explain during her presentation that we should have had it as a negative.
And so that changes the total revenues percent change at the bottom to?
No, I believe that's still accurate. The 4% is still accurate.
The 4% still accurate?
Yes,
Even though the 33% is a negative?
correct.
Okay, okay, good, that clarifies that. And then going to the possibilities for the Baylands Interpretive Center and Boardwalk, when will staff be coming forward with perhaps some suggestions from, maybe some adjustments in the CIP program to maybe fund this in a sooner or more near-term scenario?
From a CIP perspective, the work has started. Brad from the Public Works Department mentioned that has started. We committed to you at the last update of CIPs that we would reprioritize the next level, the next phase of that work as it came forward with all the other projects. So that's something that Public Works committed to you already at the last meeting.
But what does that mean in terms of timing?
I can't speak for them right now. We would have to, get back to you as to what that means. I think they need to get through the first phase, which is the design, in order for them to be able to tell. This would be my guess, but I don't want to speak for them. We would need to ask them and get back to you on that piece.
Yeah, because I think there are some projects that maybe aren't as, I'll put it this way, as important or obvious in their importance to the community. So if there's some kind of shifting of priorities and time commitments, then I think this one should move forward, and how we communicate that with Public Works.
I think that was well understood from the last meeting, and I'll make sure that I speak to and follow up with Public Works staff. I think what we were talking about is the timing of that phase 1. So that needs to be completed, not that we weren't putting that as a priority in terms of the projects already. So I think it is a commitment that is a priority.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Burt?
Let's see, first, this is not necessarily in the sequence of your report, but on the property tax projection, we're projecting 4.4% higher than last year. Was that our budgeted amount, or is that still what we anticipate, or do we think that's a conservative number?
I believe we've adjusted it upward from what was in the budget, if I'm not mistaken. What I say every year, just to assure you really, is that we keep very close tabs with the county on what the role is and what the role growth is from the beginning of the fiscal year onward. So I have to look at the numbers to answer your question precisely, but we are definitely in sync with what the county is telling us about.
Why don't I go ahead and go through my other questions, then if you can
Sure.
add on any additional information subsequently, that'd be great. On the sales tax, Lalo, I think if I understood it correctly, would frame it slightly differently, which is that aside from the single account that was abnormally contributing to our sales tax over the previous year and a half, 2 years on it, and we knew that that was a temporary measure. Outside of that, do we know how much we're up? It looks like we're up quite a bit, and that's the only way that we basically are flat in the total sales taxes, because everything else is up quite a bit. And part of the reason I'm interested is because that's our real trend line by excluding the anomaly.
So the amount of the anomaly that we excluded was 1.8 million. So that brings the 5.4 million down to 3.6.
Yeah, but that was 1.8 million just for that quarter, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, so
yes.
if we've got our years, our FY 2015 projection, which is the budgeted amount of 26 million. And we had 2014 just under 24 million. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So we're 2 million above it. And we're going to have how much less from that one account than we did last year?
It's a tough one so far on that one account because it's moving quite a bit. So it's difficult to gauge from that one. We're seeing the number continue to go down. So it's not a predictable number yet.
No, I wasn't trying to predict so much what it is going to be. I thought it had pretty much gone away. I'm trying to figure out if we subtracted the anomaly from 2014, how much would that number go down to?
Oh.
And then we look at the actual growth to the 2015, and so excluding the anomaly, that's our growth. And it looks like the growth is really significant, excluding that one account's kind of jumping around so much.
I see what you're asking.
If I could, I mean, we'd have to parse this out for you because there are a number of things going on here. We've got the anomaly from this one vendor, and we're expecting that of that we're going to get anywhere between $200,000 and $300,000 on a go-forward basis, somewhere in
per
that
quarter or
region.
per year?
Per year,
Per year.
on a go-forward basis. We've got we've built in a couple, it's mainly in the future, but there are some challenges out there and some worries in the out years. I know we're only talking about 14 and 15, but we've seen some downturn, some of the electronic company sales, and we're very concerned about that, and some of them may be ongoing in the future, so we've factored that in as well. And then in addition to that, if the triple flip calculation that was done in the past is going away, and that affected the numbers for 15 as well, where we're going to be getting the money on time rather than having to do these reconciliations in the following year. And in addition to that, I don't know if Laura's addressed it yet for 15, we're going to have a different accrual process for the revenues in 2015.
Those are accounting functions as opposed to real revenue ones.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to look at is
Yeah.
our actual revenue. And what it appears to me is that our sales tax revenue excluding that one big anomaly, is up much more than I thought.
So let us do this, because I think the key is that there's 3 big changes that I can think of. So let us commit to the mid-year that we'll try to adjust for
Okay.
these type of adjustments and give you a better sense of, if we excluded some of the big changes of normal, how do we trend? I follow
Right.
your question now.
Right, okay, and excluding changes in accounting methods and all those kinds of things, great. Under the TOT, we're at one of those periods where we see how the market affects this, where we say that our occupancy rates remain flat at 84%. That implies that, gee, you look any day of the week and we're at 84%. In reality, what that means is 4 days a week we're at 100%, and the other 3 days we're at some much lower percent. And because you're at 100% in those peak business days, we, unlike a lot of hotel environments, recreational hotel stay is really very secondary to our business. It's that business 4 days a week that drives this. When you're at 100%, the average daily rate goes up. And this jumped 15% in a year. So we won't, other than the new supply, we won't see occupancy rates go up. It's good that they stayed flat even though we had some new supply coming on, which doesn't shock me. But that what the market's doing on increasing the average daily rate by 15% that's a huge increase. So that was more of a comment, but I just want to make sure we were remembering that whole market phenomena that occurs when you get 100%. We can all see it on Priceline or hotels.com. When there's no supply, the price doesn't drop, it goes up. When are the next hotels due to come online? So we have the Epiphany on.
So, as you know, the Epiphany is opened and is in full progress. Our best guess right now, in fact, driving up and down El Camino, is the 2 Hiltons are supposed to open. They were supposed to open in January, but I think in our projections for 15, we've moved that out a little bit, like in April or May, just to be a little conservative. So those 2 are supposed to come online this year, and we have them fully built in for fiscal year 15, 16. The one on the Ming site is, that's probably at least 2 years out. And the last one is the Westin, and as far as we know, that's at least a year and a half or so out. But we have fully baked in the 2 Hiltons.
And the 2 Hiltons, when you're doing a projection of April, is that based upon what we observe, or is it based upon what they're telling us?
We've you mean in terms of opening? Mm-hmm. The opening date that they told us was December. I think planning got some information. It was supposed to be in December, early January. I'm saying that they haven't opened in December, and so we moved it out a couple of months.
So the answer is that we're making our own projection. So if we want to get better information, I would suggest we ask Tommy Fehrenbach.
We can do that.
Yeah. Because that's not an insignificant number. If April's right, then good, we build that in. If it's June, then we're going to have less new hotel revenue, and that was part of the infrastructure funding that we were planning for.
And I step away for a second, so I apologize if I'm repeating. And we'll have an opportunity to review this for the next update in the mid-year as well.
So my point was, because those 2 Hiltons are not going to open on what they told us was the schedule, why don't we have our economic development manager see if he can find out their revised opening dates?
Correct.
Okay. And the document transfer tax, we all just read that Palo Alto Square is part of a big transaction. And last year, well, we're currently 300,000 lower for the Q1 because we had some big activity last year in that period, but now we're going to have a big bump. I don't know when that would close. Is that going to close in, probably not till Q3?
Right.
Or maybe it's,
That's what we, it's just, that's what we estimate. We're in discussions with our economic development manager as well, and looking at trying to determine when the closing of the transaction is, and we'll adjust accordingly.
and do you have a ballpark of how big of a bump that is when that
That
happens?
could be, when we did the calculation, it was somewhere between $1 million to $1.3 million.
Great. Wow, that's a big bump.
That has not been baked into these numbers. Well, we would normally come back with a pretty significant adjustment to the mid-year had we not known about that. But now that we know about it, and if we can get a vision on the date that the transaction will take place, then we'll put that into the forecast as well. But I think it was clear, you know, I just a couple of quick statistics. Our transactions are down by 22% compared to last year. And the value of each transaction, the average value of the transactions to date are 23% below where they were last year through mid-December. So that's what's causing us to, and would cause us to pare down the projection for this year.
Is that commercial and residential combined?
Yes, combined. And it looks, just eyeballing it, it's definitely fewer commercial transactions because we had some huge remittances during the year through this
Yeah,
period.
I would say on this average value per transaction, unless you break it residential from commercial, it's not a meaningful number. Because if you're having fewer commercial, and those might average $10 million transactions, and the residential might average $2 million, and you're saying, well, the average of commercial and residential is down, it's got to be break commercial one conversation and residential another. Yeah. I mean, for us to do any meaningful, and for that to be a relevant,
Aggregating it to the point where you would like a council member Burt, but I guess what I'm saying is if the average has gone down so dramatically, it must mean that the high value transactions have also gone down.
well, it could actually mean two things. It could mean that, for instance, and I don't think this is the case, that that the value of the high volume, lower value, the residential transactions, that those could have gone down, and that was actually the implication. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah,
I think,
I don't think so
the answer is that we have fewer commercial, and that's where the big dollars are per
Right.
transaction.
Right, I agree.
Okay. And then finally, the police and fire OT. I couldn't quite follow the percentages that are on these bars. Are those deviation from budgeted amount? Is that what that is?
On that
It's on
chart,
slide number 5.
yeah, we're looking at the first quarter of 2012 is ground zero, if you will. And then the change from fiscal year 12 to 13 is a minus 13%. And then the change from fiscal year 13 to fiscal year 14 is a
Oh, I
plus 63%.
Okay. And where are these in relation to projections? I think you maybe verbally said that, but is that
As
on a
of the
table?
end of the first quarter, police is at 31% of their budget. And as of November, they are at 53%. And for fire, as of the end of September, they're at 55% of their budget, compared to 78% at the end of November.
At the end, what, I can't hear you.
At the end of November,
78% at the end of November.
yes.
So last year, I think it was last year, we had an early sign that fire was well above budget. We thought that that was going to get adjusted and come back within budget in subsequent quarters, and it didn't. So now we have, at this point in time, we're way above budget. This is something that we've really, over past years, have had really stay on top of to keep it from spinning out of control. We had gotten a handle on it, well, we can see it here in 2013. We had really brought it down, and now it's creeping up, and we're way above budget again. So do we have an understanding of what's driven this? Some of this, I know in fire is in fire seasons, and Q1 would have still been in the fire season this year. We may have had kind of our mutual aid for forest fires. I forget what it's called. I don't know how much of this is explained through that and how much is due to other reasons.
Councilmember Byrd, Walter Rossman, Budget Director. So there's really three factors here. You mentioned mutual aid deployments. You're correct. We had fire engines deployed to Northern California. I'm not sure, usually I don't think so, that we have received reimbursement for this cost as of yet. It takes about 4 to 5 months. Secondly, as the staff report indicates, we do have 8 vacancies in the fire department and 4 staff members on workers' compensation. So workers' compensation, with those costs, they still carried the salary costs by the department, but they still need to backfill those vacancies to have adequate staffing on the engines and other fire apparatuses. And the 8 vacancies, as we've done last fiscal year, what we intend to do is use those vacancy savings to offset the overtime. I believe it will be able to partially offset this, but maybe not fully. We need to keep an eye on it during the coming months.
Yeah, what I don't know from that explanation is how this compares to norm. So on the mutual aid, if we're being reimbursed, it's money in, money out. But that's not, to my knowledge, broken down here, right?
No, it is not broken
No.
down.
And then the 8 vacancies, how does that compare to normal? We always have some vacancies. So, I mean, this is one of the things, too, when I look at it and we say, well, you know, we've got workers' comp, we have vacancies, we have mutual aid, we have sick leave, but we always have those things. And so I would really hope that when we have these reports, we don't kind of throw in all these subject matters, we really, or these categories, we actually say, here's where we're up compared to where we normally are in this category, or here's where we're down. But it doesn't tell me anything to say, yeah, well, we got workers' comp. Yeah, I know. It's part of running a business.
If I may suggest, I think as part of the mid-year, when we have 6 months of data, we can come back with you with a more detailed analysis, which will address those questions.
Okay, but on this particular topic, it's one that each year, this goes back to years when we were fighting this number, and this was a big deal in our budget. In fact, that was that kind of number when we were having deficits or trying to come out of a deficit. And it really mattered a lot. It was before you joined us, Walter, I think. Because we've seen that particular cost category be really volatile and break our budget, we early on, when we see this getting out of control, we want to know what's causing it, and we want to really have accountability early on. We don't want to wait until when we see the mid-year, that means we're getting into spring, and then we're saying, well, let's talk next year. I want to really see when that number is growing like it has each of the last 2 years. I really want to know on a timely basis what's happening, because we had a whole bunch of basically commitments on how we were going to keep this under control. And that's what was the difference between 2012 and 2013. And it really mattered. And right now, I'm concerned, out of anything on the cost side, this is the thing that stands out to me the most.
Unfortunately, the Chief Nickel could not join us tonight, but he did make a commitment that if you wanted to have a follow-up discussion, we could schedule him to come back and give you explanations.
I think that'd be great. That's what we actually did, I think, last year.
We did.
And so I'd like to request that if that's good with the rest of my colleagues. Great. Okay, I think that covers it for me.
Councilmember Holman, you had a follow-up question?
I did too, actually. One that Lalo will remember from the past. As you look at property tax, is there any update on the status of the definition of demolition? Because we talked about how that affects property tax reevaluations and reevaluations.
I would need to follow up with Planning Director Hillary on where it is on her plan, but she put it on her queue. So I would need to get back to you on that.
And that affects City Attorney's Office too. So if you could report back on that, that would be great. And then the other one is, and this affects how we look at zoning in the future, is you're looking at sales tax. Have you done any collection of, we've had some properties that have transitioned from retail to office. So have you done any tracking of, like, by, let's say, district, those properties? So in other words, some of those properties were not going to be generating any sales tax where we did previously. And that could be really helpful for us to know when we're looking at zoning implementation.
We have not.
So you can tell, of course, like if 1234 Byron, I'm making up an address, previously had sales tax generated from it, it doesn't now.
So again, it's at kind of a high level, but we do track sales tax by geographic area. And I think our database is capable of telling us the businesses that have gone away, and we can limit that by geographical area. But we'd have to sort of superimpose, we'd have to know, what business went away here and did it get replaced by an office space in the downtown area. And I take it, Councilmember Holman, you're asking for the entire city versus the downtown?
I would say in particular the downtown, California Avenue, Midtown.
Okay.
I'd say primarily those three areas. And if you've gone from something to zero,
right,
it's at a particular address, that's an indicator. So it would be helpful to have that as opposed to just the district.
Yeah, that will take some research to do, because I think we can easily track businesses that have gone out, because we do know what businesses have ended their licenses, given up their licenses. But then we'd have to overlay that with what replaced them. So. It would take some work to do that, and maybe if we limited it to the downtown or Cal Ave, or maybe 2 or 3 business districts, we might be able to come up with a number on that. We have a sales tax consultant that we use for all of our reports, so we can talk to them about this.
That'd be great. I would hope it wouldn't be that hard, because like I say, if you go from something to nothing, it's an indicator of that kind of a change, I would think. So
okay.
I'd be interested in that, and I think it would help us do some planning. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I'll just briefly second Councilmember Burt's concerns about the overtime, in particular the fire overtime. It's something that we've talked about a bunch in the past. I agree completely that it would be helpful to get some of these numbers broken out so that we understand what's going to be backfilled. I don't even necessarily need it to be the specific itemized breakdown, but what is going to be backfilled, and what impact will that have on the percentage that we're either over or under, and are we maybe being unrealistic about our budgeting? If this keeps on happening year after year after year. I'm wondering to what extent, if we're already at 78% over on fire overtime 5 months in, that's a lot. depending on it, but I don't know to what level the backfilling will have an impact from things like coverage for the mutual aid responses to the different emergencies. I'm encouraged to see the number of fire disability was a big concern of ours last year, and I'm encouraged to see that that's been cut in half from 8 to 4 from last year. Another thing that would be helpful to see, and I'm not saying this for every department, but in particular, I think for police and fire, is what was the budget? You mentioned, Lalo, how some of this will be offset by the vacancies and the savings that we'll have from vacancies. If we can see those budget numbers maybe in here also, that helps us just get that bigger picture of, where we really stand in terms of the impact on our overall budget for public safety. That was the other, I think things look really good. I think a lot of good questions were asked. I think on the whole, it seems like things are going in a great direction. That overtime for fire and police continues to be a red flag area. Please.
Ron Watson, police captain. Just to give you the perspective on the police department's budget, you're always going to see more overtime in the first quarter and the second quarter than you do in the last half of the year, because the summer is the heaviest vacation period for us to backfill for. And then moving into the fall is our heaviest training period, which ends with the Christmas holidays. It would typically be 65% of our overtime gets used in the first half of the year, and then you'll have less of it in the second half. So we should come out pretty close to the 1.5 this year.
I was going to say, so in your opinion, you're pretty much on target, it seems like.
But I can never predict what will happen.
Anything can happen, of course. But that's helpful to know. It's helpful to know which seasons are the busiest for you guys, so that tells us whether or not we should really be worried or not. I think, let me just flip through. No, but I think, a lot of the other issues were covered. And fingers crossed, things continue to go well. Joan? Councilmember Burt.
Ron, thanks for that clarification. It suggests that if we actually have known patterns in our overtime in the police, and perhaps it's a similar scenario in the fire, we certainly in the fire know that in dry years, we have a big portion of our overtime that's mutual aid. Do we budget on a quarterly basis, or do we just break it up 1/4 per quarter? So I would suggest that if there are really significant differences that are, I won't call them knowns, but they're projections, that Q1 is going to have, say, 35% of the police overtime in an average year, then we go ahead and build that into the budget that way. And it just gives a more realistic budgeting as we break it down per quarter.
Let us take a look and see how that can be accommodated.
Great. And then, because then we won't be beating up on folks saying, why is it 35% in the first quarter? And we go through this explanation again. It's all transparent and everybody's comfy. And then, Joe, were you able to find out anything on the property tax? You can look back even later in the meeting if that's easier too. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Just to refresh my memory one more
So we're at 4.4%.
Right.
And what I was trying to understand is that what we were originally projecting?
I think we were probably more along the lines of a little over 5%. So I really need to go back and take a look at this to see what's going on there.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll add that to my list.
Great.
Of things
Thanks.
to look at.
Great.
Just would like to add one more thing is my staff just told me via email that we're expecting $185,000 in reimbursement for fire overtime due to the events, fire events we had this summer and fall. So this offsets some of the overtime.
Thank you. So that's about a quarter of what's been spent so far. Vice Mayor Niss. Pat, you good? Liz, we'll go informal, last meeting.
Just two things. On page 3 of your revenue highlights, you talk about your one vendor. I presume you're not going to put their name out here, but that one vendor, is this going to be a continued trend? It's a little bit mysterious.
So it is
You
going...
talked about who it is?
No, we talked, maybe just give another recap of this.
Yeah, sure.
No, if you've already talked about it, I'll get it from you later, okay? As I don't want to slow this down. But I have another question, and it could be either Walter or it could be whomever. But if you take a look at this, look at our budget, which is actually pretty generous in many ways, and you had to compare it to other similar budgets on the peninsula, going per capita, not size. I don't want you to compare us to Los Altos with 30,000 people. But as you look at this, what would you comment about this budget, about the service and so forth? Takes you to a very different. I'm not going to get down into the weeds. I want to come back up and just look at it from a high level.
It's a very difficult comparison, Vice Mayor, and the main reason is that we are a full service city. We obviously, as you know, be providing services which no other city in the Bay Area does. Perhaps Santa Clara gets close to it. And so we are, as Jim Keane has quoted, I think I want to quote him from the past, we are a mid-sized city with the complexity of a large city. And so it's very difficult to get a comparison unless you do it really per FTE, which you do provide in the budget, where we say our employees cost us on the average so much versus so much. So we compare police officers and average cost versus other cities. But otherwise, it is very difficult to really speak to your question because we're just so different.
Except that we are often asked, why are you so much per capita? And we're very high per capita. And yes, the service level is very high, but we've chosen to also do individual services. Many other peninsula cities choose to contract out with police and fire. They contract out sometimes with public services. There are a whole variety of other ways to do this. But I think it's important for the public to know that we choose to do it this way, really in-house, and there is an extra cost to that. So Cupertino does a contract with the sheriff.
Sure. And we also provide...
Los Altos does a contract with the fire district. So I'm just simply saying there are other ways you can do this. I realize that we are a complex city. We're a complicated city. We're a city that, views itself in a very positive way. But I think also it's important, as I said, for the public to know that these are choices we make, and that if you are doing it completely in-house, so both Pat and Mark have been talking about fire is up or police is up at this point. Those are the choices you make, and many people choose those choices. They want to live here. They're willing to spend a lot to live here. But it's also, if you're young and you've just bought a house recently, you are paying rather dearly in your taxes for it. So, thanks.
Just wanted to add to Vice Mayor Niz's comments. I think there's an important element that you talked about, choices and value choices, I'll call them. That's what we've been talking about throughout my career in Palo Alto. An example of that is that we spend over $20 million in community services. Other municipalities may not choose to do that. I think that adds to the desirability to live here and to participate in the programs that are enriching to the community, part of the fabric. So that's to your point. To the other point is that we also provide services to other agencies. For example, fire services to Stanford. Then we provide our own paramedics. We value that highly because we have a better response time versus a private firm that does that. We have 9 enterprise funds. So in essence, we are PG&E for Palo Alto, where other municipalities the residents have to deal with PG&E. So we have fiber to the premises, while it's not to every premise, to commercial. And so all of that needs some support structure that it's in the administrative services department, so you're going to see a higher per capita, no doubt, in comparisons.
So the one last thing I would
Your mic's
add
off.
is that, as we discussed the last time, Karen brought this up, and I would certainly support that we believe in, good service for our animals as well. And we'll be discussing that more in the future. But we are a very high-level service community. And I think it's important sometimes to remind our constituents of what great services they get.
I think, on that note, I think it's unanimous that Palo Alto is awesome. And
Expensive.
And I move that we approve the first quarter financial report.
Second.
I have a couple of seconds. I don't need to speak to it. Anybody else? Nope. Councilmember Holman. And all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. So we're going to move on to item number 2 on the agenda, which is and thank you to staff, is the fiscal year 2016 to 2025 general fund long-range financial forecast.
Good evening again, council members, permanent chairman, Walter Rossman, budget director. I will spend a few minutes here with you, maybe more than a few minutes, talking about the fiscal year general fund long-range financial forecast for the next 10 years. I'm here joined with Joe Saggio, who helps out, not just helps out, he's very imperative in setting the revenues for taxes. His staff analyzes with him and sets one side of the forecast for us, so we actually can present this information to you. Additionally, Christine Perez joined us at the table right now as well. So what I want to do today is give you first an overview about the forecast. What do the numbers look like for fiscal 2016? Go on over the next out years, the 9 years as well. Touch quickly on the local economy. I think you're quite aware that we're doing quite well in Palo Alto and in the region. Talks about some of the assumptions, revenue and expenditure projections, and if there are more detailed questions, which we actually discussed already with you today, Joe will definitely jump in on this one. We also developed 2 alternative forecast models for you based on discussions we had last year. Expanded on those. And lastly, 15 projections on revenues and expenditures. We touched a little bit already on that. I will highlight a few issues there. And then really lead us into the 16 budget process, of which the forecast is really the first step. So oh, you're taking care of it. Thank you. Oh, you're wonderful. Okay, so I'll leave it alone. You touch it. Let's move away the controls from me. So the forecast really sets the stage for us for the 16 budget process. What we do is we look at the expenditures and revenues. We update based on the current service levels of the adopted budget, the expenditure side. We look at the revenues, see how we have performed fiscal year 14 closing. We look at the first quarter. We look at what we see out there, and based on those, we come up with revenue projections. It really allows us and the council to not only look at fiscal year 16, but long-term, what kind of policy decisions we may have to make or can make given the fiscal outlook of this document. I do want to emphasize it is not a prediction or a commitment of resources. Rather, it is a reasonable snapshot of the city's future financial condition based on what we know today. And what I mean with that, a year from now, I will come back to you, and it may look quite different based on where we are. You've seen this model here on the slide before, and really there are 2 significant parts here. It's the operating margin and the net operating margin. The operating margin, which is the blue line, shows you year over year the one-time surplus as a deficit, and it really fluctuates quite a bit this year, and I'll be happy to explain details if you so wish. First, we are projecting a $500,000 surplus for fiscal 16. We do dip in 17 slightly, and then we are expanding our surpluses to $3.4 million in the out year. And the out year, as you well know, has much less reasonableness there. It's a pure projection, extrapolation of numbers, and it really doesn't have that much significance. However, what it does do tell us, given certain trends we see today, that's where we expect to end up. The net operating margin is the concept that we're looking at year-over-year changes in surpluses and deficits. And this is important as we're making decisions about ongoing budgetary decisions, whether it's reductions, restructuring, adding services, what this will do long-term. So when it dips down below 0, what that means is that from one year to the next, our surpluses are actually reducing. So it's a year-over-year change. As you can see from the financial forecast, it is really not much different than last year. We do have a positive outlook. Despite the positive outlook, there are always some pressures which we know. We talked today about the infrastructure plan not yet being fully funded. We talked 2 weeks ago at the Finance Committee meeting about long-term unfunded actuarial liabilities, $430 million. And there are other needs which the community has and which you're aware of. So although we're doing well on a year-to-year basis, there's still long-term fiscal pressures which we need to face and address. Also, what is included in the forecast, and which we're very explicit about, is what is not included. Because there are certain areas where we feel at this moment in time not include them in the forecast model. It could be that this negotiations may be happening at this time. It could be there are budget decisions the council would have to make before we include this. It could also be that down the few years from now, there are other laws which are changing, which may impact this forecast. So I will spend some time on this slide. It's about 10 or 11 bullets here. To make sure that we have an understanding what this means. So we are in ongoing labor negotiations. We are negotiating with Police Officers Association and the International Association of Firefighters. So we are on the table with those two labor groups, and whatever results from these discussions and negotiations will have an impact on the forecast. We do council approved the Cubberley lease just recently with the school district, and there's a clause in there about the Foothill College. If indeed the Foothill College leaves the Cubberley property, there's impact to the lease revenue, which will be shared equally between us and the school district. We're still in discussion with the post office service regarding the acquisition of the downtown post office. As this evolves, we'll see how this impacts our financial outlook. We talked today about that we provide services to Stanford for fire services. You may recall about 14 months ago, Stanford did send a city a termination letter for providing the services. That termination period is actually 2 years. So, and we are in discussion with Stanford. So as these discussions evolve, we'll see how this impacts our 16 budget primarily and budgets thereafter. One thing which we may have not surfaced yet already, but if I believe one of our council members is probably representative on the Silicon Valley Regional Interoperability Authority. That's the SVRIA. That's a joint powers authority which was created about 5 to 6 years ago in order to standardize the radio infrastructure and communications for public safety within the entire county. So for that, we do understand that the authority has plans to change infrastructure, move to 700 megahertz radio infrastructure. We do not yet know what is an impact for 16 or 17. And as this evolves, I just want to make you aware of this. There may be one-time infrastructure needs and then ongoing maintenance needs to support this radio infrastructure. The infrastructure plan is $125.8 million. We have a gap still of $7.5 million, which we have to address, despite the fact that the voters approved the 2% tax increase. So one thing which this forecast assumes already from the transient occupancy tax, the $4.7 million is transferred from this forecast into the infrastructure fund for the next 10 years. And the way we arrived at that amount is this is the annual debt service, which we will plan to issue this debt and debt service for that in order to support the infrastructure plan. So right now we keep it flat, but it's obviously council's discretion as we evolve to change that amount. Then the other thing which the infrastructure plan does not yet assume is really contingencies. We do know that land acquisition costs may increase, construction costs is increasing the environment at this time, so we really don't have anything set aside for that as well, nor does this forecast. And there's always operating budget impacts. So once we have a new public safety building, it will cost us a different amount of money. We don't know what it is, but as we go through the design phase and as we're more aware of what it's going to look like, future forecasts will include those operating budget impacts. Last year, as part of the Affordable Care Act, have to quick remember that, ACA. There's a chance of a CALIC healthcare tax. We did talk to CalPERS at the recent forum, which they host annually, and CalPERS still believes they will provide health plans to our employees which do not invoke this tax. But it's still a risk which I want to make you aware of. During the last 2 years, we have really experienced significant changes in our CalPERS rates, primarily to changes the board made on demographic assumption changes as well as actuarial assumptions changes. So the board may change assumptions in the future, so they're not included in here because we're not aware of them yet, but I also think it's important to be aware of that fact. The CalPERS rates may change and go upwards. Lastly, I talked about the unfunded liability, actuarial liability of $439 million, and we do not prepay any amount in this forecast. And we do believe, like Councilmember Byrd just mentioned recently in this committee, that we need to see, once we move away from the infrastructure plan, how can we take one-time dollars every year, which we save up, and start pre-funding these liabilities. And really, what will it do for us? Long-term, we will pay less, because we will invest at a high rate of return in those plans, and therefore our annual cost is expected to reduce over the next 30 years as we need to pay off this liability. And obviously, typical caveat, the economy may change on us. On the last slide, it's just a summary table I wanted to give you about these unfunded liabilities and how to break up at the 3 plans: miscellaneous, safety pension plan, as well as retiree health care. The local economy is doing well. This is just a few snapshots for you. Obviously, real estate is booming. We have the average home price is going up. Unemployment is down. So we are very fortunate, Palo Alto, and economically doing very, very well. So let's switch over this discussion from revenues first and then to expenditures. And I just want to share with you some of the assumptions we've used. You actually have heard some already from Joe today, so I will expand a little bit more on those, and then in the discussion and answer section, we can definitely address more detailed questions which you may have. So on the methodology is what Joe's group does is they'll look at actuals, they'll look at the things which are changing, items changing around us, like new hotels and TOT. We have now property tax consultant available to us, which we also use their expertise in. And really, as we drill down into each revenue's receipts and figure out what's the underlying structure of the tax receipts. So we have a much better understanding for projections. For the out years, we have used the typical comprehensive annual growth rate analysis, which we have used the last 2 years, and we do adjust it. So we look at that for the last 20 years back, see what the growth rate is. It does incorporate 2 recessions, the deep recession, which was experienced a few years ago, as well as the dot-com bust in the 2000-2001. And then what Joe's group does is they really see what does it make sense. So there's an analysis, a number coming back, then how do we adjust for it? Like document transfer tax, we don't go right into the CAGR because we do know that we have unusual activity, which was discussed today in the real estate market, as well as sales tax. We also dropped down the projections for 15. So let's spend a little bit on the next slide and the 5 major tax revenue sources, starting with the top, which is the red line, that is property tax. As Joe mentioned today, we work closely with the county assessor's office. We look at their projections, what they have. We look at underlying properties, how much of Prop 13 properties, how much of properties are in the trust, how many properties have turned over, what's the reasonable turnover rate of properties, and based on that, we come up with a 16 number and the CAGR projection thereafter. At sales tax, we had quite unusual activity, as we mentioned today. There's one vendor in fiscal year 14. And in fiscal year 15, which just mentioned this quickly here today, but I will expand a little bit more on it, we will have a sales tax accrual change. What happens is that obviously the taxes get accrued for 12 months in a fiscal year to the fiscal year pertaining. In sales tax, what we've done in the past until this fiscal year 14, the accrual period was from May to May versus from July to June. So it was a different 12-month period. We talked with our external auditor, and they believe it would be more appropriate to adjust sales tax accrual period to the fiscal year, so from July 1 until June 30th. We will take care of this adjustment this fiscal year, which means one time, from an accounting perspective, will accrue, actually this actual cash will adjust the sales tax receipts for this fiscal year, and an extra receipt of in fiscal 15 of $1.7 million. Thereafter, the projections will be on a regular fiscal year accrual basis. Transient occupancy tax, we adjusted for new hotels. The new hotels coming online as we understand it for today. We also started increasing the projections based on the tax increase approved by the voters. And this tax increase from 12 to 14% will go into effect on January 1, 2015. So the projections for 15 as well as the 16 and the out years have those higher tax rates incorporated. We also do look, as Councilmember Byrd mentions, on the average daily room rate, et cetera, and those factors in hotels. And we don't believe if we have very high occupancy right now that there may be a softening in the demand because we have more supply available. So we also adjust for this as the new hotels come online. So it's really a detailed analysis which Joe's group does for that. Utility users tax, there's really two parts for that. It's a telephone utility users tax. We had a tax decrease there, but a broadening of the base. So we adjusted for that, as well as taking the utility department's last year's projection for rates into consideration as we build the tax amounts for future years. So what will happen as utility comes to you in early winter, early spring with the new utility forecast, we will then, as part of the 16 proposed budget, update those tax amounts as appropriate. And document transfer tax, we're running short right now as of the writing of this report with the 40% below par. However, we just talked today about this one property which may be sold, and this may just adjust the amount one time for this fiscal year. But we are a little bit more conservative starting year 16. So at the graph, as you can see, there's a little dip in 16, and then we grow the tax receipts again. Now, moving to expenditures. It's really like we did last year, and with our new budget system, this has become an easier task, far easier task. What we do is we take the data from a payroll system, we take a payroll census, and we upload the data in the budget system. So we know at a certain moment in time, I think it was done in October, how many people are currently in the sworn police officers or firefighters, as well as miscellaneous employees, management employees, etc. Then we assume, then we also know which positions are vacant, and then we start building the budget for the next year. They contractually obligate step increases. Council just approved the management professional compensation plan for this fiscal year as well as next. And we do, for planning purposes only, but without a commitment, we do adjust the salaries 2% annually for each fiscal year as a general wage increase. And again, this is a placeholder, and it's just for planning purposes for this forecast. The other thing which we did is, in the meantime, we watch the council actions, obviously, and council did approve an expanded shuttle service with a net impact to the general fund of about $200,000. That's included in the forecast, because council approved that service level for this year as well as coming years. Same thing with the Transportation Management Authority. There was a slight increase than what we have budgeted, and this was incorporated in this forecast as well. Looking at the out years, now what we do is we look at what are reasonable increases planned based on step increases, pay performance or merit increases, etc. So we project, and then also we have benefits increases from CalPERS, retiree healthcare, which we have to pay, healthcare increases. And so it's a 3.6% annual growth rate from one fiscal year to the next, which we put into this forecast. I will talk in the next slide about CalPERS projections, so I'll go more in detail on that. But I do want to focus a little bit about our healthcare projections, healthcare cost projections, as we are changing the way how we provide this benefit to our employees. So what council has approved with SIU and with managed professional is go towards a flat rate contribution for healthcare. With SEIU, the second year of the contract, we did increase the cap of that flat amount by 2.9%. So for planning purposes, we assume a 4% increase of the cap every year in this forecast for those employee groups. However, for the safety groups, we're still on a 90-10 split. We assume an 8% growth as we've done in the past. The rest of the expenses are pretty much CPI, 20-year of 2.6%, which we project forward. So on the next slide, allow me to delve a little bit more into the CalPERS city contribution rates. What we did as part of this forecast, we expanded a little bit more discussion on pension increases and changes, as well as retiree health care, and we did attach to the document two CalPERS valuation reports, which were submitted to us by CalPERS late October. Based on these reports, the pension rates for safety for 2016 is 41.9%. So every $100 which you spend on salary, $41.90 go towards pension contribution. For miscellaneous, for the same amount of salary, is $27.7. Per CalPERS, if you look at the column of 2020, that pension rate increase goes to 52.3% for safety and 34.6% for miscellaneous. So for safety, that's a 10 percentage point increase. For miscellaneous, about a 7 percentage point increase. Now, CalPERS stops the projections in the valuation around 2020. They give a 21 number where it tapers off and flattens. But based on discussions we had with this committee last year, we decided to do slightly differently and to assume a regular incremental increase in pension cost increases for the term of the forecast. But as we've seen, and you see this on this graph as well, over the last few years of actual fiscal years, CalPERS has increased the rates every year on a steady basis. So that's what this forecast assumes. Looking at the next slides, two alternative models. So the valuation report with CalPERS provided more information than they did last year. And Lalo and I, when we met with our actuary, we were really impressed with one piece. And that is that CalPERS now provides an analysis if they don't achieve the assumed investment return. So the assumed investment return for the pension portfolio is right now 7.5%. However, in the valuations, we actually also have data if they only achieve a 2.8% investment return and what impact that has on the rates. So this is provided starting for fiscal year 18. We took those rates, we extrapolated them out, and if you do this, in fiscal year 18, our operating surplus immediately reduces by $400,000 because we're paying more into pension. If you take this for the remainder of the forecast period, our pension payment would be $34 million. So as we have seen 3 years ago when the CalPERS return dropped significantly and our pension rates were increased accordingly, it is important to understand, I believe, for us and for this committee and council, that if indeed a 7.5% investment return is not achieved, it has significant impacts to our city and to our costs. We did replicate the major tax revenue sensitivity analysis from last year, and basically if the growth rate were not within the range as assumed right now, and we're assuming it to be for all major tax revenue between 3.1% and 4.6%, but let's say we dropped this by 1 percentage point to 2.1 and 3.6%, we immediately have a shortfall in 2016 of $500,000 versus surplus of $500,000. Similarly, if we extrapolate this out, the revenue loss over a 10-year period is $47 million. Now, we do provide in this forecast also a look forward to the year end. And now this is only based on 1 quarter of data versus a large amount of actual data, but I think it's still important to have a quick discussion with you on that. It's sort of in line with what we actually had already before with Q1. It's a sales tax accrual. We do project overall that say that revenues for taxes will come in at $4.2 million above par, above the budget. 1.7 million of that is sales tax accrual. We have the higher TOT increases because of the tax increases, which were not assumed in the budget, and other fluctuations and other increases at this time. By the way, what I want to mention is we will bring forward as part of mid-year. I already seen today, I received requests from departments which will analyze one-time increases for the mid-year, and we only really consider one time. So this does not include any of those requests yet. If we bring them forward to the City Council, this committee, as part of the report in early March. The last thing is a look forward to 2016 budget process. We have, thanks to approval by this council, we have implemented a budget system. The system, the forecast has been produced. It has allowed us to be much more accurate in our forecasting. It has allowed us to model different alternatives far easier. And we are in the process of training, we will train departments in January on usage of the system, including a workflow process, etc. Then we will refresh the payroll data. So we'll do an upload of the census in January based on new healthcare choices the employees made, which are effective January 1. And we plan to release the budget to you late April, early May. We'll see how it works out. That was our goal last year too. We went more towards early May, but we would like to bring it to you earlier. Then we have deliberations of this committee in May and council adoption in June of 2015. In summary, as I mentioned at the introduction, this forecast is based on reasonable assumptions of available data. It projects a slight surplus for 15 and for most of the years in the of this forecast. Throughout this forecast period, except for fiscal 17, revenues increased slightly more than expenditures. And despite this positive outlook, as I mentioned to you, as shown with the alternative forecast, it's important that as soon as reduced revenue growth happens or we have higher costs, we may be immediately in the deficit positions in the out years. Further, the city continues to face substantive financial obligations, and Lala would like to address this in more detail with you.
Sorry for the length of the presentation, but we recognize that you were here pretty late last night, so let me try to be brief on the summary points. Some of the highlights that I think that are important to be covered. We as an organization have made a commitment to the infrastructure master plan that you approved, and so that is embedded in here, and we need to try to adhere to that as best as we can. Obviously, there could be things that will be beyond our control, such as the cost escalations or variations in revenue, and that could be in a negative or a positive. The other point that you saw in here is the significant amount of unfunded actuarial liability for the retiree medical and the pension. I think this is something that we need to start thinking about and how we're going to try to address it. I'll give you a couple of comments after I highlight the points here. And then the last piece is the economy and how we must continue to adjust, constantly adjust for our assumptions and trends and potential future impacts. And I think a lot of the discussion that we had earlier in the first quarter is an example of what we're talking about, that it's good that you give us those questions because it forces us to keep thinking and revisiting our numbers, both on the revenue and the expenditure. So, what are some of the things that we need to be thinking about as an organization? I think we need to continue looking at public-private partnerships and nonprofit organizations to partner up on how we deliver our services, continue to potentially review for outsourcing of services. The Vice Mayor Ness was talking about how other agencies have done it. We have done that. We need to continue to look at that and have it in a structure where it causes the least disruption to the organization and to our employees. This is with the goal of reducing our pension and retiree medical liabilities. One potential way is to get those savings and increase the contributions to those trusts. We do have some hope that we continue to see a shift. In your first quarter report on package page 11, you can see the details, but the miscellaneous plan has 28% of the employees under either the second or third tier. So just to remind you, as we move into the lower costing tiers in the future, that will help us offset some of the increases. It's a matter of timing, obviously. For the safety plans, we're at 14%. So, the other piece that we need to look at is the cost of service study. We decided to wait since we were so close to the new council coming in. So in February, we're going to come to you and talk about the cost of service study and what the plans are, and update everybody, catch you up and update the new council members on what we want to do and some choices that we need to do and implement some potential policy changes. And then we need to continue engaging our bargaining units regarding the rising pension and retiree health care costs as we discussed, increases in salary as well. It's a balance. And so I think those are some of the key factors that we feel are embedded in here and that are important to you and to us and to the community.
Great. Thank you guys very much for the presentation. I'll open it up to colleagues who have any questions or comments. Speak now or forever hold your peace. What's that? Oh, Councilmember Burt.
Yeah, well, I have a good number, and that's why I was wanting to let others go first and see if they would peel off some of my questions. So first, on slide number 4, I have several questions. The ongoing labor negotiations, I wanted to make sure I understood what we've projected into the budget. On one of the subsequent slides, 9, we have a 3.6% annual growth rate of salaries and benefits, but that's salaries and benefits. So what do we have assumed on?
Sure. First of all, this is an average number, and safety obviously has a higher number than miscellaneous, but what we have assumed for salary increases to 2% growth for every fiscal year. This is typically what we've done last year as well, and it's just keeping somewhat pace with inflation.
Okay. Second, on the Foothill College cover lease, I'll just use this opportunity to throw in that I'm not very apprehensive about a shortfall from that. I'm anticipating they'll leave and that we'll have a period at which we may have a vacancy, but I spoke with the city manager just recently because I was brought to my attention on how this very strong economy is driving nonprofits out of commercial spaces that they've historically leased. We saw this same phenomena occur during the dot-com boom, and it was a real problem for the community because these are vital community services that are nonprofits. They're not city government, and they're not necessarily nonprofits that we're financially supporting, but they're being pushed out of Palo Alto. And many of those nonprofits would love an opportunity to occupy at Coverly, perhaps at rates above what we currently charge at Coverly. So what I suggested, and this is more something for community services, but I just want to share it with you, is that we figure out a way to begin to do an inventory of nonprofits in the community and find out who's interested in Coverly space. And so we don't wait until Foothill vacates for us to desperately try and backfill it. And perhaps we don't even wait to lose these nonprofits before we begin a process of seeing if they're good tenants that might actually be higher income than even our current tenants. And then on the fourth bullet about the fire services with Stanford, we really haven't had the update in quite a while, and I'm assuming that's because there are still negotiations going on, but the last I had heard was it sounding more likely that they would be staying long-term. Am I understanding that correctly or not?
So it has been quiet at the front, not the western front maybe. Maybe it's the western front, Stanford. We are engaging with their consultant at this time, but we have not returned back to the table. But we hope, indications to me today believe that we're trying to get this done for January. I have talked to the consultant and said, I would love to wrap this up before the budget process, so we have certainty. And the fire chief equally has talked to the public safety chief on Stanford as well.
Okay.
So right now, no updates, unfortunately.
Okay. And then on the radio frequency infrastructure investments, I have no idea what kind of dollars we're looking at. Do we have any approximation on both the capital and the operating? And I appreciate these would only be approximations or ranges.
And this is from my memory, so bear with me. I believe it was capital investments of $1.6 million for 2 years. Okay, Top Hall is nodding at me. And ongoing maintenance, 300,000? Yeah, it's about right, 300,000 ongoing. So So the way, I forgot to ask which of our council members serves on the board.
Well, it was actually restructured. So I used to be on
Okay.
the Emergency Preparedness Council, but I believe that this is now in a different restructuring. And we
Okay.
don't have a representative.
Okay, oh, we don't have one, okay. So that's what we got received from police at this time. I did ask for more information, but I think it's important to raise that issue to the committee as there may be an impact from the public safety side. And this, Palo Alto has not yet decided to partake in this program, in the standardization, and talking to public safety folks, obviously, they would love to participate because it makes sense from interoperability between agencies.
And I don't recall this being in our development impact fees for public safety. And maybe this would come online sooner. Is there a reason? Well, one, is it in there? And second, if not, should it be?
I'd have to double check, but I don't believe it was because we weren't aware of it at the time that we created the list of needs.
But we're going to be updating those again, right?
That is our hope, that, because I believe that we'll have better clarity within a year or two, and we can then look at what we have.
And in what time frame would this be happening?
What I received from police department is it may have an impact to fiscal year 16, or it may be pushed into 17, so it is not really clear to us yet, but we definitely will stay engaged with the agency to figure this out.
And is there any cost recovery on the operating costs? Do these get spread anywhere, or it's all going to be out of general fund?
I'm not sure what you mean with cost recovery.
Well,
The way this agency works is that each agency in Santa Clara County who participates, or which participates, contributes funds to this agency, and they purchase the equipment centrally and as well construct the infrastructure, such as radio towers. And so there's really, general fund is the main, if we can use development impact fees and have it in place, the general fund is really the main source for this investment.
but this is all for,
Oh, I get it. Okay, yeah, there
so
will
go
be
ahead.
Stanford cost sharing in that, but Stanford does reimburse the city for a portion of the capital investments.
and then even, does any of this serve, when we compute our paramedic service costs and ambulance service costs, it's a cost recovery of our fire department. Would this play in with that at all, or is this really separate from that?
Sure. Where it could potentially play into the fire services is reimbursed by Stanford at this time at 30%, and believe for capital investments is at 25%. So there will be some reimbursement through that contract, but we'll see where that contract goes.
But not other operating costs?
But no other operating costs,
Okay.
that's correct.
So on the future changes to the pension plan assumptions by CalPERS, we're not believing that we should be making any projections to our long-term forecasts that would assume a change to, this is rate of return, right?
Correct. So in lieu of assuming a change, we provide in the forecast an alternative model to see the impact. Now, pension plans in California as well as in the U.S. have moved towards a lower investment return rate of 7.25%, some rate at 7%. But now that's still the minority, but you do see definitely a downward trend. But at the CalPERS forum, which we attended in October, there was no talk about this yet from CalPERS. That just moved from a 7.75 rate to 7.5, I believe, 3 years ago. That's correct? That's what I remember too, just before I got here. So that's why we didn't assume anything, but I think it's important again to note there may be changes, and we need to be aware.
So was there no talk because they don't want to talk about it, or because they don't think it's going to happen?
That is unclear, since there was no talk.
Okay.
I think going back to my closing comments, it's something that the council may want to consider is if we make additional contributions to anticipate other changes, either in the negative or changes in assumptions that could impact the trust. So that's something that I think can be a topic of discussion.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into my next question, which is, do we make an assumption of a lower rate of return, or do we instead put our dollars into paying down on the unfunded liability?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because the unfunded liability is a known, I would lean toward putting the dollars there.
Yeah, and CalPERS has facilitated that, and in the attachment that we provided to you by giving us a different amortization schedule. So if we wanted to assume a shorter period, what will it take for the contribution and what the impacts are, so we can have a fruitful discussion at some point.
When would be a good time for us to have that deeper discussion on that?
Well, it depends on how you forward the long-range financial forecast. We've had, typically the discussion has been at the council level, meaning that even if you approve it at a 4-0, we've had a wide discussion. So maybe that is the point of bringing the topic up, and whether you want to refer it to finance or, you know, P&S, and that would make sense to me. During the budget process would be another point. Not to, but you had thrown it out, if I remember correctly, that maybe at the council retreat. So, you know, I think those are some options there.
Okay, so when it comes to our motion, I think I may want to include something there. And then going to slide number 8. The x-axis is in absolute dollars, and so when we look, for instance, at the property tax, we see that the slope increases upward, presumably because we're assuming a steady percentage increase, and the absolute dollars have an increased slope. The other categories don't show that to my eyeball, with the exception of the document transfer tax. So I wanted, and the utility users tax, that may be something that has its own reasons for not being inflationary as we're looking at consuming less utilities. But in particular, the sales tax and the transient occupancy tax, are we assuming that they will continue at a steady percentage increase?
We have, well, first with the transient occupancy tax, we've obviously built in the 2% and we built in the new hotels, but we have built in a compound annual growth rate, and that is around 4.4%. So it may, we're doing that compound annual growth rate over the next 10 years. It may be different each period. It may be lower in one period versus higher in another period in the out years. But to answer your question, we did build in a compound annual growth rate, and that slope is going up.
No, it's a straight line. The line is straight.
The TOT?
It increases, but it's not. It doesn't change its slope. The property tax changes its slope, and that's what would happen as you're essentially having a compounding of the dollars.
Well, the slope looks pretty consistent, except for
No,
the slope from 15 to 25 for
4%. Let's just take it. Say it's a 4% increase on, call it $10 million, is not the same dollar amount as a 4% increase on $15 million. So if the base year has risen, the slope should be going up because the axis on the left is in dollars, not percent.
Councilmember Byrd, we do show the percentage increases on packet page 28, which may be
Okay,
helpful
so
for
maybe
you.
it's just the graph.
Yeah, it may be just the way it projects on the screen, but there you can see in detail the percentage increases year over year, which are assumed in this forecast. So you see property tax fluctuating between 5.6% and going down to 5% in the out years. So what we have done is we use the cake analysis as a starting point. However, we do adjust what we believe is more reasonable within the parameters.
Okay, so I can't see what those percentage numbers actually are, but I'll assume that's the case. So you just may want to look at the way the graph is, because the graph doesn't show
I appreciate that. Thank you.
that kind of compounding over time.
May I give you another update on the SVRA? My staff is feverishly typing to me in the back here. So if you look at packet page 25, 26, we actually detailed that, and it escaped me as you asked me the question. So really for this effort, if the city participates, 2/3 will be covered by general fund, partially reimbursed, we believe, through Stanford. 1/3 will be covered by utility funds, because we would want to have the utility department on the same frequency, megahertz frequency.
Okay, good. So that's a second reimbursement, good. All right, and then on slide number 10, which is the CalPERS city contribution rates, the thing that really stands out is how public safety, the percentage of our dollars in public safety that's going to the CalPERS is growing enormously. It's growing significantly on non-public safety and enormously on public safety, even after we've done the pension reforms that we have over recent years. So I'd hate to see what this would look like if we hadn't done those reforms. But first question, do these reflect the shifts to the third tier?
So first of all, the CalPERS valuations a year in the 1 year in the arrears. So that's the first issue.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
It's 1 year behind.
Okay.
2 years? 2 years, yeah. So what you see in there is only 6 months of Tier 1 employees, so from January 1 until June 30th, 2013. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it, as you probably have recently read, in California, the majority of members in the pension plan CalPERS are actually retirees versus actives.
Actually, so I'm sorry?
There are actually more members who are retirees than the actives. So what that does is it takes a long time until this population shifts. And even though we have brought in Tier 2 employees 5 years ago, by the time that affects the valuation, it takes a good 10, 15 years. So one analysis which we asked Bartel to do for us a year ago, and they said, well, if you were to overlay the population of Tier 2 and Tier 3 as it was, I believe, in April of this year, so we actually asked me 6 months ago, what will this do to our rates? And he said within 10 years, it adjusts by 0.5 percentage point. So it's the incremental effect is very small within this forecast period, so that's why we really haven't adjusted for that. However, as Lalo mentioned, it will have a long-term impact for us. And it just will take time, unfortunately, as we move on in our periods in life.
So one of the questions for me is, are we still in an unsustainable structure of pensions, especially for public safety? As we see this going up by 2025 to 64% and 42% respectively, those are enormous numbers.
I do believe that we would need to continue working with our bargaining units and seeing how we could share the increase in cost in pensions. with them, especially for the safety units, as you mentioned, because the increases are substantially higher than miscellaneous, so that these costs of these higher costs will be shared as part of a compensation package.
Yeah, because it seems that the bottom line is, if we hadn't made the reforms, we'd be at a crisis a lot sooner, maybe now. But even with the reforms, we're not out of the woods.
That is correct.
And remind me, I should know this, but within public safety, is that only uniformed officers that are in their pension system at the formula?
That is correct. So you have sworn employees, police officers and firefighters, and also captains and fire chiefs, etc. Except the deputy chiefs and the fire chief are not part of this plan. They're part of miscellaneous.
And I guess part of this discussion, and it may not be one that we have any other ground that we could move there, but it's a question of do all of the positions that we have as sworn officers need to be sworn officers long-term? I'm not talking about abrupt changes, but as we look at the functions that we have in our public safety departments, is every position that is a sworn officer has to be filled by a sworn officer? And I don't know the answer to that. I'm not assuming that there are radical changes and opportunities for changes there, but it's just something that I want to put out there.
Yeah, it's something that we can definitely be looking at. I know that Sunnyvale had made some changes. San Jose has also made some changes to that. But I think it's something that it's worth exploring all of our options as we see these costs escalate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Yeah? Oh, Liz, do you have questions?
No, I'd like to get on to cap and trade. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Rowland?
Just a couple of 3 questions. As we look at revenues, this is related, and maybe it's more of an audit question than a question for you all, but we want to take advantage of opportunities too. Are there grant opportunities that we are maybe not taking advantages of in terms of some of the funding mechanisms here?
I know the staff has been very aggressively looking. I can tell you that community services, public safety, our chief sustainability officer has brought in staff, and that was one of the first things that we talked about, how they're chasing grants. We've even asked you, and Walter needs to help me with the amount, I think it was $30,000 or $50,000 of funding to have somebody help us move quicker on grant opportunities. Some of them have conditions and restrictions that make it difficult for us. But we're definitely looking at that and submitting. I get to sign the form and the commitment to us when there's a percentage of contribution required, for example. So I can tell you that I know that staff has been actively looking at grants.
So something else that
I forgot planning too. It's a big planning. Transportation is actively looking at.
I'm just going to throw this out there. One of the things that I've been interested in for a long time is a redundant power source and redundant energy source or power source. I'm just wondering if that's and it costs a lot, but I'm wondering if not only are there any possibilities certainly for partnering for creating it, but also then if we own it, or how that structure might be set up so that we could actually generate resources from it.
Just so I'm on the same page with you, you're talking like solar, for example, that type of example?
No, not talking about solar.
The supply line?
Yeah.
Oh. I think Val's, I don't know if Val can help me with the answer, but in terms of the cost of what we consume as a city, is that what you're referring to?
Well, the cost to get it online, and then the revenues that we might generate from providing that access to other communities, if there's a possibility there.
Oh, I would have to defer to Val to see if she could.
You just want to repeat?
You can come back with it, but it is something I'm interested in because it's I think, an important resource that we should have here too. And then the other thing is services that we can provide to other communities, and one of them we just talked about, I think just last meeting, have to do with animal services. We have a lot of partner agencies that we could look at, or partner cities and communities that we could look at for that, but I don't see anywhere where we're looking at what those possibilities and opportunities are.
I can tell you from the last experience we had outside of the animal services, the prior city manager came up with the idea of doing what you're talking about. And the council was very concerned, and they passed a policy saying that the only way we would provide services to other agencies if we were 100% cost recoverable. And it was a big deal to the council at the time. So when we started doing that, we provided IT services to about 7 communities throughout the area. And then there was a change in the recognition of retired medical. Once we embedded that into our rate structure, every single agency dropped out. So that was the challenge that we faced, that once you put a full cost of a fully benefited employee, it becomes challenging because the other agencies could probably contract out for that work at a much lower cost. And I believe, without updating the numbers today, that that's probably still the case.
And do you think that's, go ahead, Walter.
And actually, that's the issue which we have with Stanford at this time. That Stanford believes that fire service could be provided at a less expensive cost, and that's a discussion we have with them at the table. So that's a challenge we do have, as our benefit and salary structure is still quite high, that we're not that competitive yet. As we move towards other tiers and our pension costs will eventually come down, I think we can probably experience a more competitive situation where we can provide service to other agencies, which is still 100% cost recovery.
I think one thing that we could look at that has made sense and that's been done in San Mateo County, and it's not catching on with Santa Clara as much. We've talked about it, is regionalizing some of the potential services. And I think
doing what, I'm sorry?
Regionalizing services. In that way, it's the volume and the costing and sharing and having RFPs that take care of multiple cities, therefore the volume gives you a better pricing. Those are the kind of things I think we can continue looking at.
There's also the cost/quality component here too. So what are we offering in terms of quality compared to cost? So, other agencies might be able to get a service at a different cost, but is that service comparable to what we could provide? So there's the cost quality sort of thing. Councilmember Burt's question, I think, is one of the looming ones here is, the increased costs, represented on slide 10. And, if there were specific recommendations, I don't know if you have any now or if you want to go at this another direction or another time, but specific recommendations on how to get that back into control. Maybe change the trajectory.
We could do that. So let's assume that it's not going straight out for the next 30 years. I think there will be a tapering off. Now, I'm not a crystal ball. I don't own one, but I would think this will happen. I think the only way to really control, start reducing the impact of pension costs to a city is to really share with employees. Some cities, I believe Morgan Hill and also I think Cupertino, what they have done as part of the bargaining agreements, they have said, as the increased cost to the city from one year to the next for CalPERS city contribution happens, that increased cost, that incremental percentage is shared in a certain percentage between employees and the city. So those are the models I've seen in the labor relations world. But otherwise, it is very, very difficult to reduce this. The other thing we obviously can do, and Palo mentioned that as well, how can we reduce the city employee population? So if we have different ways of providing our services, whether it's moving from sworn to non-sworn, whether it is outsourcing that we've done with street sweepers just recently. It's the other ways how we can provide the services to still achieve a certain level at the level of quality which our residents expect. And that's also the challenge we will have, but I think contractually we can oftentimes bind the contractor to that level of service, or the quality of service. But really that's another way of looking at long-term reducing the cost because we have less people on the payroll and less people to pay those pension benefits to.
I know we've talked about this in the past a little bit, but is it also maybe something we should look at is quantifying, qualifying, better defining dependent costs?
So what CalPERS has done on the health side, they started 1.5 years ago with a dependent eligibility process, and they're updating this again this next year, I believe, where they're really looking at if employees, which are the people and employee claims should be supported by that health plan, are they really eligible to be on that health plan. And PSO, People Strategy Operations, just told me a few weeks ago that CalPERS dropped quite a few dependents on our health plans, and they have, because they didn't submit the verification, and they may be still eligible, but they haven't provided documentation. So that is obviously something that CalPERS is doing to bring the costs down for all its participating agencies.
And this is kind of a wild out there kind of question, but is there any level of self-funding that would make sense?
You mean self-funding for pensions?
Well,
To a level, to a percentage.
yeah, I think that's the discussion we suggested, we have at the council level that, with the options of sending it to committee, so we can present to you various ways that we could try to accomplish that. It's either by, I think we touched earlier, changing the rate of return assumption, changing the amortization. All of those contribute to the assets that go to offset the unfunded portion, and that would drive the contribution rates down. Obviously, the number of memberships as well does, and the contributions by employees. So there's various factors that we would need to come back to you with that work if that's what the council wanted us to do.
And that's again something that maybe we wouldn't have to go alone.
Alone.
In other words, partner with other agencies, potentially or possibly.
Well, each agency has their own trust. So for example, I know for a fact Sunnyvale has decided to add additional contributions beyond what CalPERS says you need to put in. So that doesn't impact us. It's just their own trust. So these potential changes that we're talking about would be on our own.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you very much.
Pat, you mentioned that you might want to tweak or add some things to the motion.
Just one, yes.
There we go.
Okay, so you're ready for a motion. First, I move that the Finance Committee accept the fiscal year 2016 to 2025 general fund long-range forecast, and we forward that forecast to the City Council for acceptance. And second, that we recommend to the City Council, we recommend that the City Council refer to the Finance Committee discussion and recommendations about alternate or means by which to address our unfunded pension and retiree health care liabilities.
Second.
No.
So I'll just quickly say that I enjoyed who's the literary fan amongst the group? Is that you, Walter?
So no, actually, I am a literary fan, but the one who came up with is Mike Bruckner. He's sitting back there. He's one of my new analysts.
Thoroughly enjoyed that.
I'm glad. So actually, he asked me, it's very funny, he asked me, so you think it's okay to do this? I said, I think we need to liven it up a little bit, yes. So it starts on the economic discussion.
On page 5, page 17. We've got a little Shakespeare. I might have missed, I caught 2. Were there more than 2?
And he has Charles Dickens.
And Charles
in there,
Dickens.
The Tale of Two Cities.
Yeah.
I have to express some
On packet
Gratitude.
page 20 at the top.
gratitude. If I could, I just wanted to express gratitude to Michael for including this, but also some remorse, because at one point I used to include literary allusions and, let's just say, above-average vocabulary words, and they were taken out of the narrative.
Were they?
Or unappreciated, so I think he started a new trend and for the better.
I'm glad they're coming back. No, this is great. Thank you guys for all the hard work, for the entire report. And for
Chair
that.
Berman?
Yes, please.
Before you cast your vote, we wanted to get direction from you whether you wanted this to go to consent or action, so that's something for you to consider.
What's our precedent on that?
Well,
For most items, but I don't know if the long range is.
yes,
is
but because of this,
the addition.
this additional recommendation, I suspect that there will be colleagues who would like to wade in on that.
Before it goes
in
to
a
finance.
preliminary discussion to kind of give some guidance to the Finance Committee.
I'm fine with that. So let's have it go on action.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So all in.
I have a comment.
Yes, please.
So we're talking about sort of doing some in-depth studies. I hope that what we'll do is look at other cities and other areas and how they do this. The issue of unfunded liability has been discussed for 10 years in this county, at least. At the county level, they've discussed it ad nauseum, to be honest. There are many ways that you go about it, but regardless, the bottom line is the more employees you have, the more of an unfunded liability you have. So when we talk about whether or not you're going to go contract or otherwise, that's one of the big issues that you deal with that we don't talk about very much. But there's a great deal on the radio today about it because of the vote they took in San Jose this morning. So I think as we look at this, at least look at others to see what they have done. The same with funding. There are cities that self-fund, as you well know. And I think we need a comparison of that when we actually get to it. But I think it really ought to come through as a colleague's memo. This is a big area. This is a lot to take on. And also earlier, Councilmember Burt mentioned doing a nonprofit look at the city to see who might be interested in renting at Coverly. I think that's another big area because when Foothold moves out, you will have some vacant space, and it will be, I'm sure, in demand. But it's the question is, does it go to a profit or a nonprofit, or what's our policy on that, and so forth. So there's some big questions that we've been asking you tonight. But in particular, I'd like us to look at other cities, how they're handling both their liabilities, their unfunded liabilities, and so forth.
Bert?
Well, yes, I'd just like to follow up on that. As far as contract services and outsourcing, we actually, over the last half dozen years now, have moved extensively in that direction. And maybe it would be useful, Lala, when we do have this discussion to revisit our trends in what we have been doing so that everybody understands the degree to which the latest we did just this year is our street cleaning. But we've had a whole succession of outsourcings that we've done, and that's how we reduced our head count. Or I would say that's part of how we reduced our head count. The second thing is on whether we need a colleagues memo or not. I don't think we do. We have a good mechanism right here and now to refer this to the council, and I don't think it needs to go to a colleagues memo. We've just done it.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. So that passes unanimously. Councilmember Holman. Yeah, thank you. No, not at all. And it'll go on action as opposed to consent like normal. Thank you. I know a bunch of you guys, I imagine a bunch of you guys might be leaving because I don't know if you guys are so relevant to the next item, but just wanted to thank everybody. I meant to do this last night and I forgot to, but thank everybody for all of the work that everyone's done over the past year, and thank my colleagues for the good conversations and questions that we've had. It's been fun. I've enjoyed it. And I think things are going really well, and the quality of reporting of the staff reports has been incredibly high, and you guys 99% of the time have answers immediately, which we really appreciate. And so thank you to everybody for all the hard work that you guys have done. Really appreciate it. With that, we'll move on to the next item, which is Utilities Advisory recommendation that the Finance Committee recommend that the City Council approve a resolution amending the city's cap and trade revenue utilization policy to cover the use of freely allocated allowances for the gas and electric utilities, and a resolution amending rate schedules G1, G1G, G2, G2G, G3, and G3G to add a rate component for cap and trade regulatory compliance costs and combine the administrative and transportation charges with the distribution charges.
Did you say that again?
Yeah, right? I know. It all makes sense. I mean, it's totally crystal clear.
Steph is preparing the presentation.
No rush. Thank you, guys.
Chair Berman, members of the Finance Committee, good evening. My name is Valerie Fong. I am the Utilities Director, and I have with me here today Eric Keniston, who's a resource planner, who will cover our proposal on dealing with gas cap and trade. Just want to also acknowledge Jane Ratchey, Debbie Lloyd in the audience, and then someone who's not here right now, but John Aubenshine, very involved in this, and then we've had legal help from Jessica Mullen.
Good evening, Commission. Good evening, Council members. To start, we're here tonight to discuss changes to the cap and trade policies, and changes to rate schedules that we have to accommodate cap and trade for gas. Thank you. I'm ready. So, as a bit of background, CARB established the cap and trade program as a means to implement what was put together in AB 32 back in 2006. Starting in 2012, electric utilities have been subject to the cap and trade regulations. In those particular cases, the compliance obligation rests with generators, and in our particular case, because we don't have any fossil fuel generation, we generally do not have a compliance obligation in any given year. As such, though, we are given a free allocation of allowances by CARB. Those we turn around and we sell back into the auctions. Starting in 2015, however, gas comes online. You might have heard in the media that not only gas utilities, but also gasoline companies and gas in general will all be subject to cap and trade, because the obligation at that point rests with the final end-use sale. Palo Alto now does have a compliance obligation. In this particular case, we are also going to receive free allocations from CARB, but it's likely not going to be quite enough to cover our total compliance obligation that we have in any given year. Moving on. So the free allowances that we get, and currently there's a 5-year schedule. We get a certain amount. I have an example coming up in the next couple of slides. It'll decrease by a little bit every year. As another part of the regulation of those free allowances that we get, we are required to sell a certain amount of those into the auction. It starts with a minimum of 25% must be sold the first year. By year 5, that goes up to 50% of the free allowances we have to sell. So immediately that drops it down. We have even more that we will have to turn around and purchase within the auctions. Lowering consumption will obviously help, but we're probably always going to have some need to go out and purchase in the market. One thing that must be said about auction proceeds is that they must be used exclusively for the benefit of gas utility ratepayers and must be used in compliance with AB 32 and also must follow the spirit of what CARB sets down. So here's a hypothetical example. Here we're using estimated gas purchases of, say, 25 million therms per year. That would roughly translate to about 133,000 allowances. Each allowance is equivalent to 1 metric ton of CO2. The first year allowance allocation that we get is roughly going to be 160,000. But as I said, the minimum that we have to sell right off the bat or sell in the first year is 25% of that, so roughly 40,000 of it. And that would leave 120,000 allowances that we could use to meet our compliance obligation in that first year, meaning we'd have to go out and purchase roughly 13,000 allowances. Right now, well, as of the slide, we were estimating that the floor price for next year's auction markets would be roughly $12.08. Just got the letter yesterday, though. It's going to be $12.10, so slightly different. But the sale, what we'd have to go out and buy at that floor price would be roughly about $157,000 worth of allowances. What we're proposing is that we want to take this additional cost and pass it through directly to customers, very much in the same way that we currently do with our regular gas that we buy at PG&E Citygate. In this particular case, that would roughly translate to about a 1 cent per therm additional bill increase. And right now, with the way our rates are, it'd be a little bit less than 1% a bill increase, or per a rate increase. Now, we add another line. You see the bottom 3 lines down there. That's sort of a worst-case scenario. In most markets, and there's 4 auctions each year, there are a certain number of allowances that are put out for sale. People offer to sell the allowances that we offer to sell, and the allowances that others are offered to sell all go out there. If the demand is roughly equivalent and everyone can go out and buy what they need, then everything is fine. But if demand outstrips what is actually supplied in the markets, there's an additional mechanism called a reserve market. Now, to date, there has not been a reserve auction run. But if it were to go, the highest possible theoretical price that we're saying would be out there for next year would be something along the lines of, say, $60, obviously quite a bit higher. In that particular case, the price to buy those same allowances, if we needed to, would be roughly $785,000, and that would only translate to about a 3 cent per therm increase. Again, about a 3% increase. Are you ready? Yep. Now, getting back to what we must sell, that 40,000 allowances at the auction floor price would run about $483,000. These would be revenues that we would use to fund programs as we discuss in the policy. So the proposed allowance revenue policy that we're putting out there is an update to our existing electric policy. And we're making the amendment to add gas into the mix. It clarifies that allowances must be used to meet compliance obligations, but it sets a couple of different things that including but not limited to things like investment in energy efficiency programs, potentially purchase or investment in cost-effective renewable biogas resources, investment in other carbon reduction activities, even potentially things that could reduce fugitive emissions. And the last bullet item we have down there is rebates to natural gas customers. That is an option that you probably have seen or heard of, that PG&E does that currently twice a year. They give a rebate to their customers. When we were at the UAC meeting on October 1st, one of the things that they did, one of the motions they made, is that we would like to make it to where rebates are the last option that we would choose. We prefer to go for any sort of greenhouse gas reduction measure first, and rebates are sort of the last last thing if we can't do anything else. If we were to bring forward rebates, though, this would, of course, take a council approval before we could do such thing. The policy also outlines reporting requirements to council and CARB. As I was saying, the proposed rate changes, we're looking to add a new line item that reflects the cap and trade compliance costs. It's going to be strictly pass-through. It will have a range similar to the existing commodity rate of between 0 to 25 cents. The reason why you put 0 out there is because in some cases we might not need to buy compliance obligations. Also, in future years, it's possible that we might have some existing obligations from prior years that we can use to bring down our cost. The current thought is that we would update the prices based on the quarterly market prices, but again, we will reflect what we actually buy in any particular situation and pass that on. One additional administrative action that we decided we'd do at this point in time, if you've ever looked at if you've noticed on your gas bill, there are two lines called the administrative and transportation components, very small. They don't change hardly, if ever. So for bill clarity and to make things easier to understand, we are going to roll those two components into the existing distribution rate, and so eliminate some additional bill complexity. It's a revenue neutral change, so it's more housekeeping. As I said, the October 1st UAC review, there were discussions about fuel switching. There was some concern or want to potentially add fuel switching to the list of allowable uses, but after much discussion, we determined that it's not precluded from what we have in the existing policy. But we also said that any program that we put forth must be cost-effective and consistent with all legal and regulatory requirements. Any program that we do, we're going to have to evaluate to see if it meets what is set down in AB 32 and is something that CARB is going to accept and allow. We have already, I believe we've gone out to CARB and asked them for certain guidance and guidelines. I don't know if we've heard back yet, but that's out there. Another, and as I mentioned earlier, rebates, one thing that was put forth in their motion is that we add a line saying that there was a preference that measures the reduced greenhouse gas emissions be pursued before providing rebates. We agreed with that, and that motion passed unanimously. So, the recommendation is that staff requests that the Finance Committee recommend that Council adopt an amended City of Palo Alto policy on the use of freely allocated allowances under the state's cap and trade program, and another amendment to rate schedules G1, G1G, G2G, G2, G3, G3G to add a rate component to collect the cost of compliance with the state's cap and trade program, and to combine the administrative and transportation charges with the distribution charges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll kick it open to colleagues if they have any questions or comments. I'll kick it off then. And I'm not that familiar with this program, but so this seems funny. The concept seems funny. We're given allowances based on certain factors, and then we're told that we immediately have to sell initially 25% of those allowances, but because of that, that means that we have to buy more allowances on the open market, but we're going to use, and that charge we're going to pass through to customers, but the revenue that we generate from selling the allowances we'll use for efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which I think is fantastic. But that was, I mean, that's the plan, and this made sense to folks when they passed it in Sacramento.
So
and what I missed.
So if I could do a little bit of background, and I know any of the folks here will correct me, or Jane or Debbie can step up as well. When we had the electric side cap and trade auctions launched, CARB, the California Air Resources Board, recognized that there had been a lot of actions taken by the electric utilities to pursue renewables, in particular to pursue renewables and to pursue solar, local solar through Senate Bill 1, and didn't see the need to pass through, at this point in time, additional cost price signals to customers to reduce greenhouse gases. That hasn't happened with the gas utility. And CARB actually is very convinced that gas customers have to feel a rate impact to understand that they are doing something to help the environment here. And so that's the concept here. It's a little bit different from what we got on the electric side.
Gotcha. And this is their way of achieving that?
They were very focused on it from the very beginning, yes.
Okay. So that was an initial clarification question. I don't know if I'm happy to open it up to folks. I mean, this all seems, other than that, it seems like it makes sense. Councilmember Burt?
Well, Chair's question made me appreciate that maybe when this goes forward to the council and kind of on an ongoing basis, perhaps there's some graphics that will help people understand how the allowances and the dollars flow and why they flow the way they do, because it is complicated, and Val, just did a good job of boiling it down to its essence. But I think that's something that we're going to have as part of this program going forward, and the average citizen and maybe most council members are not going to get it by a lot of narrative that, no matter how accurate the narrative is. So it's a tough thing to simplify. Second, you mentioned that investor-owned utilities have essentially the same requirements. They had been having rebates, and they're now going to be strongly discouraged from doing so, is my understanding. Is that right? It's a last resort? No? I missed that.
I think the investor-owned utilities may continue to do rebates, but I can't remember all the rules that apply for the IOUs on the gas. I think the PUC is kind of...
I thought I was hearing that the PUC was now saying that's the last use of the funds that they want to permit. Did I misunderstand that?
It was the UAC for us. I'm
sorry.
Clear about what the PUC
UAC,
might be directing the IOUs.
PUC.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Then I agree with them anyway. Then I did want to, so our compressed natural gas facility is completely outside of these considerations. Is that correct?
So we have Debbie Lloyd, our utilities compliance manager, here to help us out. This is a compliance issue.
My understanding is that's not even run by the utilities, that's a Public Works gas function, right?
Correct.
Yes, so that would be sales that the utility makes. So the gas utilities compliance obligations are going to be based on our retail sales, and that would go into our sales figures.
So does the compressed natural gas at our municipal service center, the utility sells that?
Yes.
Yes, we sell that to the municipal service center.
Okay, so the reason I bring it...
To be clear, just so that we understand the model here, so we are the wholesale gas provider to that facility. They do recover their costs through their own compressed natural gas rates.
So the reason I bring it up is that Sustainable Silicon Valley had an event just 2 weeks ago, and one of the exhibitors was a supplier of renewable compressed natural gas. And I asked, well, what's the premium on this? And they said none. They're selling it at market rate. And I went, really? And so we can look at that as something offline. I just thought I'd mention that, and I was surprised, and it could take a chunk out of not only our greenhouse gas emissions, but switching, if we were buying it at the same wholesale rate as we buy conventional natural gas, then would it translate into more credits essentially under the cap and trade program? Is that correct?
Well, it gets a little complicated because
I
Public
imagine
Works.
it is,
Sorry, but Public Works is the one that actually sells it. So the Utilities Department will correctly track all of the sales within the city of Palo Alto. We don't do the resale because that's almost a double count. So
Okay,
in
well,
theory, whatever costs ultimately for greenhouse gases are embedded in our sale, it will be paid for.
okay, so I'll let you guys look at the merits of this and how we capture the reduce carbon emission value, who gets it, what pot it goes to, what pot it moves to, I don't know. And then finally, on this issue around efficiency and fuel switching. So let me ask, we have efficiency, which we might describe as, okay, if we have a gas appliance and we have something that uses less gas, that's efficiency. If we have a gas appliance and we move this to something that uses no gas, that's a switch, not efficiency. But I'm not quite sure why that should be a bright line, other than it's really bright that the latter thing is the better thing to do with our carbon neutral electricity supply. And so an example, and maybe one of the best opportunities, is heat pumps. Rather than gas hot water heaters, we have heat pumps which are more efficient, higher capital cost. And under the scenario that we have here, would we be allowed to incentivize, offer subsidies for ratepayers to convert to heat pumps from natural gas consumption?
Hi, Jessica Mullen from the City Attorney's Office. So I'm going to jump in with just kind of the legal implications, and of course there's always policy implications with these types of questions, which I'm happy to have you guys chime in with afterwards. So when we talk about fuel switching, I think there's two sort of legal frameworks that complicate but don't necessarily make impossible, but we want to be sure we do the analysis. So because we'd be contemplating, it sounds like here, the use of gas, GHG sort of revenues, right? So the revenues that are from the GHG program, we would have kind of a Prop 26 overlay that we need to be concerned with. And then also kind of the cost or sort of the benefit to the gas ratepayers requirement that's embedded in those GHG regulations. So those are the two sort of legal requirements that we'd have to contend with when we would contemplate a program like that. The reason why sort of legally it's not as easy to make a jump from a traditional EE program to an energy efficiency program to fuel switching being just the same sort of thing, even though, as you correctly point out, it kind of looks similar because you have less gas usage. There's two things that I think can make this a little bit different. So the first is that you've got this commingling of funds. So in a typical energy efficiency program for electric, say, you're giving a rebate for people to sort of just straight up reduce their use of those electric appliances. Here, we're asking people, we're sort of incentivizing people with gas GHG revenue funding to basically go from being gas customers, reduce that usage, and become sort of electric customers. So this sort of commingling of funds means that we can't necessarily rely on existing case law that's out there that says EE programs or energy efficiency programs are part of the cost of providing for service.
So let me just take this hypothetically. So if I had a device that reduced my natural gas, I say I had a hot water heater, and it was, hypothetically, if there was one that was so efficient that I could reduce my gas consumption by 90% or 99%, that's efficiency. If I have one that's so efficient that it's 100%, it doesn't qualify because it's zero gas, and instead I used an electric system.
So I think in your hypothetical, I think where it gets a little bit tricky from a Prop 26 analysis is that, and also from a, frankly, CARB regulation standpoint, which requires benefit to a gas utility ratepayer, is this commingling aspect. You know, you're sort of using funds from one enterprise and then commingling it with sort of incentivizing that, you know, more customers in that other enterprise. And then the second, just quick legal issue. Oh, okay. Sorry. Sometimes don't realize how fast you're talking. But the second issue that I would just quickly flag is that an important piece of this puzzle too is the cost benefit analysis for any fuel switching technologies. So we're kind of talking about heat pumps here, but there's a broader range of potential technologies that I imagine would fall within that purview if we chose to pursue such a program. And I think you'd have to look at the cost benefit analysis to feel comfortable under Prop 26 for all of those technologies, which I know utilities has done fairly recently and had some, you know, results that kind of needed some additional study on those. And then you'd also have to look not just at that individual ratepayer cost, but also what's the cost to those gas ratepayers that are still not switching over and staying in the gas system themselves. The cost would increase for them. You know, there's fewer ratepayers.
But we have that issue anytime we have efficiency. We have that with water efficiency. We have that with any gas efficiency, and that doesn't come into play only when an appliance moves from one energy source to another. It comes into play when we simply reduce the use, right?
That's correct. I think what I'd caution you about, though, again, and I don't mean to keep harping on this, is this commingling factor, and it's that sort of mixing. I just want
to break these up. So if you're saying that, you know, if we got one argument that we're going to have to contend with that has to do with increasing the burden on the remaining consumers, I think we can say, well, that's already exists, at least to a great degree, when we do all efficiencies. And this is one of the problems that we've debated for years, as we have ratepayers who say, well, gee, I cut my water use, and because the infrastructure portion of the delivery system is constant and the commodity is only half the cost or whatever, my rate per gallon went up. Well, that's what we're talking about here. Separate issue on the commingling. I understand that.
Well, yes and no. I agree with you that the argument that you're talking about here is that whenever we do efficiency, the impacts on the ratepayers within that specific enterprise are going to feel it because there'll be fewer of them there to spread the costs across. I think the distinction that I'm trying to make here is that we start to move into somewhat uncharted, though not impossible, waters when we start to say that the reason for kind of a decrease in ratepayers is because we're switching them from one enterprise fund or one enterprise kind of to the other. I think that's a distinguishing factor that means we're kind of pushing the envelope a little bit in terms of the case law, such that we can't point to a specific case that says these types of programs are okay.
So I appreciate the statement you had made about whether existing case law is there. I'm pursuing whether the fundamental concepts of the regulations may allow us to move in that direction.
So we do need to look at this a lot more. We're
well,
very
and
mindful.
I understand that. So I just wanted to put
so
some. And
we're
this
not
is,
deaf to all the things you're raising. We understand these need to be looked at.
And I appreciate that this is something that the City Attorney Stump had identified in the context of our fuel switching colleagues memo. So I appreciate that this is something going forward. I just want to have some initial framing around this. And the only other thing that I will add is that as we identify what sort of statutory barriers we have I've already had some discussions with our legislators about receptivity toward removing those hurdles to the degree that it's possible, because they understand, just as we discussed a week ago, that we are at the forefront, not a week ago, it was last night, at the forefront of looking at how do you actually get to what is the state objective of an 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And it was always called a plan, and in my mind, there never was a plan, it was an aspiration. We're now beginning to look at what a plan would look like, and the plan may need changes to our statutory structure to enable it. So what we want to do is begin the process of identifying what might need to be fixed in law to enable this. And the sooner and so I want to make sure that we don't merely frame this in terms of can't do that because the law says no. It's how would the law need to be changed to enable, also, how would the law need to be changed to enable what we and the legislature ultimately wants to achieve. So I just want to make sure we're thinking about that, beginning that conversation and framing it in that way. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it's a good presentation.
Nope. Thank you very much for the presentation. I will go ahead and move
The
the recommendation that the Finance Committee recommend that Council adopt everything that's there.
Second. Did you get one?
Now I did. Seconded by Vice Mayor Inez. I have no other comments. Nope.
Oh, I would simply say that we certainly are, we're committed, and it's complicated in addition to all that. And the place where I'd agree with Councilmember Burt is it's always hard to explain to people that as you use less of something, it often costs you more. And I think that's probably one of our biggest challenges.
Costs us more in dollars, benefits society. Any comments? I'm getting loopy. It's hour 10 of our meetings over the past day and a half. With that, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
No.
So that passes unanimously.
Can I just ask?
Please.
Can this go on consent to the council?
I think it would, yes.
Is it
I mean,
okay.
having passed unanimously, it
right.
will,
Thank you.
absolutely. And thank you guys very much for the report and the work and the presentation. And next on our agenda is future meetings and agendas.
Well, the good news for this particular Finance Committee meeting group is that you do not have any more meetings. The next scheduled meeting will be February 3rd, 2015, pending the structure of the new Finance Committee. I just wanted to thank you, Chair Berman, for your leadership, and I want to thank the Finance Committee for your guidance, direction, comments, and questions throughout the year. We appreciate it.
Lalo, thank you for all the hard work you do to keep us in line and moving forward, and your patience on some of my simple questions.
I'll move appreciation of Lala.
There we go. Second. All right. On that note, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.